Kale had never imagined he would be standing in the grand throne room of the Galactic Empire, his knees shaking under the weight of a uniform that seemed far too tight, and a heart pounding like the drums of war. Every envoy, noble, and diplomat in the room was watching him, their eyes glittering like stars reflecting off the polished floor. The ceilings of the hall soared so high that Kale could barely see the golden chandeliers hanging above, each one glowing with a strange, almost magical light. He had been sent from a distant planet, a small world with barely any influence in the Empire. His mission was simple in theory: deliver greetings, present gifts, and leave without making a mistake. But the moment he entered the hall, he realized how fragile simple truly was. At the far end of the hall, seated on a throne carved from a single, enormous crystal, was Queen Valira. She radiated authority, beauty, and danger in equal measure. Her hair was the color of midnight cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes, green as the forest moons of Kale's home planet, seemed to pierce through everyone in the room. Even from across the hall, Kale felt as if she could see every hidden thought, every trembling doubt. "Steady yourself, Kale," he whispered to himself. He straightened his back and tried to breathe calmly, reminding himself that he was a trained envoy. Politeness and diplomacy were his weapons. Words were his shield. But words, as he was about to discover, had a mind of their own. As he approached the throne, carrying a delicate box of crystals from his planet, Kale noticed the way Valira's cloak shimmered with a strange light. The folds of her robe caught the chandelier's glow, emphasizing her posture, the curve of her shoulders, and before Kale could stop himself, he let his mouth speak what his brain hadn't approved. "Nice ass," he blurted out. The hall froze. Time seemed to slow. A single candle flickered, and Kale felt as though every eye had turned into a laser beam focused on him. He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, but no words came. His mind scrambled for diplomacy, for excuses, for anything to recover, but all he could do was stand there, bright red, praying the floor would swallow him whole. Then the most unexpected sound filled the room, a soft, melodious laugh. Queen Valira leaned forward slightly, her emerald eyes sparkling with amusement, and said in a voice smooth like silk yet sharp as a blade, "Say it again." I meant you look impressive in Courtiers exchanged worried glances. Diplomats whispered nervously. Kale felt like he had stepped onto a stage in a theater he hadn't rehearsed for, and the queen was the director who could make him disappear with a single gesture. Kale knew he should be frightened. Every logical part of him screamed that he was walking on a knife's edge, yet another part, a foolish, reckless part, wanted to obey, to hear her laughter again, to see if the glimmer in her eyes would stay. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "Nice ass," he repeated almost inaudibly. The room erupted. Some stifled gasps, others muffled chuckles, and Valira leaned back slightly, her laughter filling the hall. It was unlike anything Kale had ever heard, rich, musical, and full of amusement and curiosity. He felt both mortified and strangely exhilarated. "You are bold," Valira said, her eyes studying him carefully. "Most would have died of fear after such a mistake. Tell me, do you always speak so freely in the presence of queens?" Every instinct told him to back away, apologize again, and retreat to the safety of his quarters. But he couldn't. Her gaze had wrapped around him, binding him in a way he didn't understand, and for a moment the hall and the empire faded into the background. It was only him and her, the queen who laughed at danger, who challenged authority, who seemed untouchable yet entirely human. "Come closer," she said. Her voice had that gentle but irresistible pull. "Let us speak privately." Kale ignored them all. His focus was entirely on the figure in front of him, the queen, who now smiled with an unreadable expression. When he reached the foot of the throne, Valira gestured for him to kneel. Kale obeyed, unsure if he should protest, if kneeling was proper, or if he was about to commit some irreversible faux pas. "You have spirit, Kale," she said, her voice low and intimate. "Most of my guests are like shadows, silent, careful, lifeless. You are dangerous in the most delightful way." She wasn't angry. Every tale he had heard about the Galactic Empire painted the queen as ruthless, untouchable, unyielding. Yet here she was, teasing him, testing him, and he realized with a mix of fear and exhilaration, perhaps inviting him into something far more complicated than diplomacy. Before Kale could respond, a servant arrived, bowing deeply, carrying a silver tray with a small crystal vial filled with a glowing blue liquid. Valira took it, her fingers delicate and precise, and held it up to the light. "Drink," she commanded. It is a refreshment from the highest spire of my palace gardens. Only the brave or the foolish refuse. Some poison trap for an envoy who dared speak freely. Yet looking into her eyes, he saw no malice, only amusement and curiosity. Taking a deep breath, he accepted the vial and drank. The liquid was cool and sweet, like starlight distilled into taste, leaving a tingling warmth that spread through his body. Valira smiled. Courage, curiosity, foolishness, all admirable traits in one. Do not squander them, Kale. They may save you someday. As the court returned to normal, Kale rose, feeling both embarrassed and strangely exhilarated. Courtiers whispered, but he barely heard them. The queen had chosen to notice him. She had chosen to play with him. And somewhere deep inside, Kale felt the first spark of a dangerous, thrilling bond. When he left the throne room, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fears, and desires. One thing was certain. He had blurted out a phrase he would never forget, and the queen had not only heard it but invited him into her world with it. He was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the universe was daring him to jump. And Kale, for all his caution, felt a part of him wanting to leap. Kale barely slept that night. His quarters were small and plain compared to the grandeur of the palace, but even here, in the quiet, he felt the presence of Queen Valira's gaze, as if her piercing green eyes followed him wherever he moved. He replayed the moment in the throne room again and again, hearing her voice, soft but commanding. Say it again. Somehow he had captured the attention of the most powerful person in the galaxy. The next morning, a royal messenger arrived. Kale, still in his rumpled uniform, opened the door to find a small, elegant note sealed with the queen's sigil, a shining green crystal in the shape of a leaf. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. The note read simply, "Come alone, V." When dusk arrived, the eastern garden was bathed in a pale blue light. Bioluminescent flowers glowed along the paths, and gentle streams reflected the fading light of twin moons. The air smelled of sweet nectar and something faintly metallic, a reminder that this garden was unlike anything on his home planet. And there she was, Queen Valira. Standing by a fountain, her cloak brushing the ground, her hair moving like shadows in the moonlight. She looked less like a ruler here and more like a myth come to life, untouchable, mysterious, and breathtaking. "Kale," she said softly, but her voice carried authority and amusement. "You made quite a mistake today." "I truly did not mean." Valira circled him slowly, her steps silent on the stone path. "Tell me, Kale," she said, stopping in front of him, "do you always speak what you think without thinking of the consequences?" "And foolishness, well, it can be entertaining." Valira motioned to a small bench by the fountain. "Sit," she commanded. "You will need rest if you are to survive my questions." The only sound was the gentle trickle of water from the fountain and the distant hum of the palace at night. Finally, Valira leaned back, resting her hands lightly on her knees. "Tell me about your world, Kale," she said. "I have many diplomats, many envoys, but few as curious as you. Why send yourself, a low-ranking envoy, into the heart of my empire?" Could he reveal the truth without offending her? He took a deep breath. "I wanted to see the galaxy, Your Majesty," he said. "To understand it and to represent my people as best I can. I did not expect this." He gestured vaguely at the palace and perhaps foolishly at her. Valira laughed softly, a sound like wind through silver leaves. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Do you understand what you've stumbled into, Kale? There are powers here that few can imagine, and dangers even fewer can survive." That word echoed in his mind. He had been bold when he spoke, foolish as it was, and she had noticed. Perhaps in her eyes that mattered more than politeness or protocol. Valira stood, walking slowly around the fountain. The moonlight caught her crystal adornments, making her seem almost ethereal. "The Empire thrives on order," she said, her voice low, "but order is fragile. Power can be both a weapon and a curse. Do you know what it is to hold power, Kale? Sometimes, fate places it in your hands whether you want it or not. It is frightening but also exhilarating." She was not only a queen, she was a human carrying burdens that few could imagine. Valira's voice softened further. "Many see me as untouchable, perfect, dangerous, but you speak freely, Kale. You see me as I am. That is rare, and it is dangerous." He had spoken honestly, yet he feared the wrong response. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension and curiosity. Then Valira laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made Kale's chest tighten. "Careful," she warned, her eyes twinkling. "Flattery is a dangerous tool, but honesty, that is even more dangerous. I like it." He realized that every word, every gesture, every breath between them was part of a game, one he was not entirely prepared to play, yet could not resist. Finally, Valira stepped closer. "You have courage, Kale, but courage alone will not keep you alive in my world. You will need wit, cunning, and sometimes a little foolishness." She tilted her head, studying him. "Do you have all that?" The conversation flowed, sometimes serious, sometimes teasing, and always charged with unspoken tension. Kale felt himself drawn deeper into her orbit, caught between fear, admiration, and something more intense he could not yet name. By the time they returned to the palace corridors, Kale realized that he had crossed a line, from guest to participant in a game he barely understood. And yet he did not want to step back. Valira stopped at the edge of the corridor, looking down at him. "You will see more of my world, Kale, but beware, what you see is only a fragment. The rest is reserved for those willing to take risks, and I may be the greatest risk of all. You survived the first challenge, but the real game has only just begun." He knew one thing for certain: nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The morning after their walk in the Eastern Garden, Kale awoke to a strange feeling. It was not fear, though he had plenty of that. Nor was it simple excitement. It was a mix of curiosity and caution, a sensation that tingled in his chest and made his palms sweat. He knew, without fully understanding why, that his life had changed the moment he spoke in the throne room. The palace was quiet at this hour, the corridors empty, and the sun had not yet risen over the spires. Kale dressed carefully, polishing his uniform and straightening his posture as he walked toward the Queen's chambers. A sense of purpose drove him forward, though he was unsure if it was courage, curiosity, or something else entirely. As he reached the ornate doors of Valira's private wing, a servant bowed deeply before opening them. "The Queen requests your presence, Envoy Kale," the servant said, voice low and respectful. Kale nodded and stepped inside. The room beyond the doors was vast, filled with towering shelves of ancient books, glowing crystals, and mysterious artifacts whose purposes he could only guess. At the center, Queen Valira stood beside a holographic map of the galaxy, her fingers tracing routes between stars and planets. "Ah, Kale," she said without turning. "I wondered how long it would take you to find your courage again." Finally, they reached a hidden door behind a large tapestry. Valira pressed her palm against a crystal embedded in the wall, and the door slid open silently. Beyond the door lay a staircase winding down into darkness. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. "This is part of the palace?" he asked. Valira nodded. "Few ever enter here." "It is the Chamber of Shadows, where the secrets of the Empire are kept. If you are to understand anything about me, or survive my world, you must see it." At the bottom, they entered a wide hall filled with strange artifacts, glowing vials, and ancient scrolls. The room hummed with a faint, almost magical energy. "These are the tools and relics of the Empire," Valira explained. "Some are gifts from allies, some are trophies from battles, and some are things you should never touch." He could feel the power in the room, a tangible force that made the hair on his arms stand on end. "It's incredible," he whispered. Valira smiled faintly. "It is, but power is never harmless. It attracts envy, greed, and danger. Those who underestimate it are destroyed quickly." She walked to a pedestal in the center of the hall and lifted a crystal orb, its light swirling like a storm inside. "This," she said, "is a fragment of the Star of Viridia. It contains knowledge, but also a curse. Those who misuse it vanish without a trace. They shape me, bind me, and isolate me." "Because," Valira said softly, "you see me, you speak freely. You are not afraid, though perhaps you should be. And I want to know if you can survive the truths of my world. Then we shall begin your lessons." But as the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, he realized that he was not just learning about the Empire. He was learning about her. About her courage, her burdens, and the loneliness that came with power. She had a sharp mind, a fierce spirit, and a heart that carried the weight of countless lives. And yet, when she looked at him, there was a flicker of something softer, curiosity, amusement, perhaps even trust. Kale felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. He was an envoy, a visitor in her world, and yet he felt drawn into her orbit, caught in the gravity of her presence. As the evening deepened, Valira led him to a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the capital shimmered like stars below, and the twin moons cast silver light over the spires. Kale felt a moment of calm, a brief respite from the intensity of the day. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Valira said, her voice soft, almost wistful. "Yes," Kale agreed. "It's unlike anything I have ever seen. This city, this empire, it is magnificent, but it is also fragile. and fragile things must be protected, sometimes at great cost. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through him. "Your courage is admirable, Kale," she said softly, "but it will be tested, and perhaps your heart will be tested as well." Valira smiled faintly, as if she knew what he was thinking. "Rest tonight," she said. "Tomorrow the real lessons begin, and Kale," she paused, her eyes locking onto his, "be ready for shadows that are darker than you can imagine." Now he was entangled in Mystery's power and a woman who was as dangerous as she was mesmerizing. As he returned to his quarters, Kale could not stop thinking about her, the queen, the myth, the woman behind the crown. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, filled with secrets, challenges, and dangers he could barely imagine. Yet he also knew that he could not turn away. The next morning brought no relief. A series of unusual events began to unfold. Kale noticed strange figures in the palace corridors, servants who seemed to move silently, advisors who glanced at him with unreadable expressions, and whispers of plots that made his stomach churn. The empire, he realized, was alive with schemes and danger, and he was now a part of it. Valira summoned him again, this time to the council chamber. The room was large, filled with holographic displays of planets, fleets, and intelligence reports. Advisors argued and whispered, but Valira's presence commanded silence. "Kale," she said, gesturing for him to stand beside her, "today you will see the reality of power, not its beauty, not its glory, but its weight, its shadows. If you survive this lesson, you may yet survive the rest of the Empire's truths." Yet, as he looked at Valira, standing tall and radiant even amidst the council, he felt a strange surge of confidence. She had chosen to let him see her world. She had chosen to involve him in her life. And for reasons he could not explain, he felt ready to follow her, to face the shadows, and to step fully into the game she had begun. As the council session began, Kale realized that the true journey had only just begun. Secrets, dangers, and perhaps even forbidden feelings awaited him. But one thing was certain: he could not turn back now. Not after seeing the real Queen Valira, and not after feeling the pull of a world more magnificent and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. And in the back of his mind, Kale knew that somewhere deep inside he wanted to survive. Not only for duty, but for her. The palace seemed quieter than usual the next morning, but Kale felt a tension in the air that made him uneasy. Courtiers moved with cautious precision, whispers floated down the corridors, and the servants' usual light-hearted chatter was replaced by hurried, hushed tones. Something was coming, something that would test him and perhaps test the queen. Valira summoned Kale to the private audience chamber again. This time her expression was serious, the playful sparkle from their first encounters replaced by a sharp focus. "Kale," she said, her voice low, "today you will leave the safety of these walls. You will face trials that will challenge your mind, your courage, and your loyalty. Are you ready?" Finally, she nodded. "Good, you will travel with me to the shattered plains. You must learn to see, to think, to act when the path is dangerous and uncertain, and perhaps to understand what it means to protect something precious. The transport awaits." As they ascended above the city, the palace and its spires grew smaller, and the vast expanse of the galaxy stretched out before them. Kale gazed out of the viewport, mesmerized by the beauty of the stars and the distant planets. Valira's voice broke the silence. "Do not be distracted by beauty, Kale. The shattered plains are dangerous. Every step must be measured. Every choice matters." "This is incredible," he whispered, though the word felt small against the vastness of the place. Valira landed the ship smoothly, her movements precise and controlled. "Incredible, yes, but also deadly. Keep your senses sharp. Watch the winds, the shadows, and the paths that seem safe. Nothing here is as it seems." The winds howled through the jagged rocks, carrying strange, eerie echoes. Shadows moved oddly, twisting across the landscape, and Kale felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "This place tests more than courage," Valira said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It tests perception, patience, and instinct. Fail in any, and the plains will take more than your pride. They will take your life." She was in her element here, moving with grace and certainty, and somehow he knew that if he followed her carefully, he might survive this trial. As they advanced deeper into the plains, the terrain grew more treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted out like teeth, and deep chasms opened unexpectedly underfoot. Strange, glowing symbols appeared on stones, shifting as if alive. Kale realized these were traps, magic, or illusions designed to mislead travelers. Valira paused and turned to him. Observe, Kale. The first lesson is to trust your instincts, but not blindly. Question everything you see. The plains deceive the unprepared. He noticed patterns in the wind, in the mist, in the way the light fell on the rocks. Slowly, he began to anticipate the illusions, avoiding pitfalls that could have been fatal. Valira watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "Good," she said finally. "You are learning." The queen, despite her own apparent ease, never slowed her pace, and he marveled at her stamina and focus. At moments, she offered him guidance, a word of advice, or a gesture that allowed him to avoid danger. Each time, he felt a connection growing, a bond forged through shared struggle and mutual trust. As night fell, the plains transformed. The mist thickened and strange, luminescent creatures emerged, flitting like fireflies. Their light illuminated paths, but also revealed dangers lurking in the shadows. Kale realized that navigation required not only skill but courage, and he felt a surge of determination. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the valley. A section of the rock formation above them shifted, sending debris tumbling toward them. Kale froze, unsure what to do. Valira reacted instantly, pulling him out of the way with swift precision. "Move," she commanded. They sprinted, diving behind a large boulder as the rocks crashed around them. Kale's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through him. "You see," Valira said, catching her breath. "This is the reality of danger. It comes without warning. You must act, not think. Sometimes instinct must lead and trust must follow." As they continued, they reached a narrow canyon where the mist was thickest. Strange voices echoed through the air, whispering Kale's name, questioning his intentions, mocking his fear. He shivered. "Do not listen to the illusions," Valira said calmly. "They are shadows of doubt. Focus on what is real, Kale. Your courage is stronger than your fear. Remember that." Kale sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. I made it," he whispered, his voice trembling with relief and awe. Valira smiled faintly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you survived the first trial, but there are more ahead, trials of mind, of heart, and of spirit. Do not grow complacent. Kale, remember this: courage without wisdom is reckless, strength without compassion is dangerous, and loyalty is tested when it matters most." He felt a deep respect for the queen, mixed with something he did not fully understand, a growing admiration, trust, and a sense of connection that was both thrilling and terrifying. The twin moons rose above the plains, casting silver light over the jagged rocks. Kale lay on his back, staring at the stars, thinking of the queen and the trials they had faced. He knew the journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt ready. Ready to face the shadows, ready to trust his instincts, and ready to follow Valira into whatever dangers awaited. And deep in his heart, he knew that surviving these trials was only part of the challenge. The greater test of loyalty, courage, and perhaps love was yet to come. The wind howled through the shattered plains, carrying with it the scent of danger and the chill of uncertainty. Kale stood at the edge of a jagged cliff, his uniform torn, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. His muscles ached from the trials of the plains, from the narrow escapes and endless challenges, but his determination had only grown stronger. He was not just an envoy anymore. He was a survivor and perhaps a protector. At the plateau below, a strange light flickered in the ruins. Kale recognized it immediately. It was the same magic that Valira had warned him about, the fragments of power scattered throughout the shattered plains. But now it was active, dangerous, and threatening to consume everything in its path. Kale's heart pounded. He knew that the queen had ventured into the ruins ahead, following a trail that could either save the empire or destroy it. Without hesitation, he began the descent, careful with every step on the jagged rocks. As he moved, his mind replayed all that he had learned. Courage alone would not be enough. He needed wisdom, patience, and trust in his instincts. He thought of Valira, her guidance, her lessons, and the strange bond that had grown between them through these trials. The thought gave him strength. Reaching the center of the ruins, Kale saw her. Queen Valira stood before an ancient altar, the crystal orb of the star of Viridia hovering above it. The magic around the altar swirled violently, the air crackling with energy. Valira's expression was focused, commanding, yet there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Kale," she said without turning, "you made it, good. But this will be your final test. The power of the star cannot be controlled without sacrifice. We can do this." Following Valira's instructions, he moved carefully, adjusting the position of the crystals, redirecting the energy flows, and observing the patterns in the swirling magic. Every instinct, every lesson Valira had taught him guided his actions. Valira's voice rang out over the chaos. Now, Kale, focus on the balance. Trust the pattern. Let your mind guide your hands. From the shadows of the ruins, a dark figure emerged, one of the Empire's ancient guardians, awakened by the disturbance in the magic. Its presence was massive, terrifying, and radiated a silent threat. Kale, Valira said calmly, though her eyes narrowed. Do not hesitate, you must act. Using the patterns of the ruins and the flow of the star's energy, he lured the Guardian into a trap. With precise timing, he redirected the magic, creating a barrier that contained the figure without harm. Valira nodded approvingly. Well done, Kale. You are learning faster than I expected. The star of Viridia pulsed with a steady light now, its energy no longer chaotic but balanced. He had survived the trials, and together they had protected the power of the Empire. Valira stepped closer to him, her expression softening. You have proven yourself, Kale, not just in courage, but in heart, mind, and loyalty. Few ever reach this point. I could not have done it without you, your majesty. You guided me every step. For weeks he had followed her through danger, uncertainty, and trials that tested every part of him. Now, at the end of the final test, he realized something undeniable. He cared for her, and he believed she cared for him as well. The queen's gaze held him, her green eyes reflecting the light of the star and the moons above. The Empire is safe for now, she said softly. But Kale, the true challenge is not over. You have survived the external dangers, but the choices of the heart, those are far more difficult. Valira's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. Good. Then let us return to the palace. There is much to rebuild, much to protect, and perhaps much to discover about ourselves along the way. He was a partner, a confidant, and perhaps something more to the queen who had once laughed at his blunder and then drawn him into her world. When the palace came into view, glowing under the twin moons, Kale felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. But more than that, he felt a new understanding of the queen and her world, its dangers, its beauty, and the complexities of its ruler. Valira turned to him as they approached the throne room. Kale, she said softly, you have grown, you have faced fear, chaos, and uncertainty, and yet you remained steadfast. That is rare, that is valuable, that is trust. I trust you with the Empire and with yourself. But more than that, he had survived the test of trust and courage, the test that mattered most of all. In the weeks that followed, Kale and Valira worked together to stabilize the Empire, facing political intrigue, hidden threats, and the delicate balance of power. Kale learned quickly, guided by Valira's wisdom and strengthened by the trust they had built in the plains. And in quiet moments, when the Empire's dangers faded into the background, they would walk through the gardens, talk under the moons, and share laughter that felt like sunlight after storms. Kale never forgot the moment in the throne room, the mistake, the daring words, and the queen's unexpected response. It had been the spark that set everything into motion. One evening, as they stood atop the palace spire, looking down at the glowing city below, Kale felt the words rise in his chest again. He turned to Valira, his voice steady, full of reverence and honesty. Nice ass, he said softly, repeating the phrase that had begun it all, but now with admiration rather than foolishness. Valira's laughter rang out, warm and bright, echoing across the city. She leaned closer, her hand brushing his, and for a brief moment the Empire and its dangers faded. It was just the two of them, bound by trials, trust, and a connection that neither magic nor power could break. You are reckless, she said, her eyes twinkling, and perhaps that is why I like you so much. And you are dangerous, your majesty, but I trust you. The trials had tested him, shaped him, and connected him to the queen in ways he had never imagined. And as the wind swept across the palace spires, carrying the scent of distant stars and the promise of future adventures, Kale knew one truth. No matter what dangers awaited, no matter how uncertain the future, he would face them. With courage, wisdom, and Valira by his side, there was nothing they could not overcome. The stars shone above like distant fires, and the galaxy seemed vast, infinite, and full of possibilities. And in that vastness, Kale and Valira stood together, stronger, braver, and connected in a way that neither title nor power could diminish. The Empire awaited them, but they were ready. And perhaps, Kale thought, the greatest adventures were not battles or magic, but the discovery of trust, courage, and the bonds that bind hearts together.